look, I get to come here and tell you about all the ways I fucked up to try and encourage you not to. Hello, and welcome to the Writer's Mindset with me, Ellie Betts. And Christina Adams is around. I just have something different in store for you this week. I want to look back at the very first episode we did, 9 Surprising Reasons You Can't Finish Your Work in Progress, and just go through some of the things I've learned about what we advised, having done my dissertation. So the 9 Surprising Reasons You Can't Finish Your Work in Progress episode was actually our very, very first episode, believe it or not. It feels like a lifetime ago now, even though it was only 10 months ago. But the content within the episode is very much true. And I can verify that now, having barely finished my work in progress for the dissertation. It is crazy to think how far the podcast has come this year. It's only been, less than a year. I'm already at almost 3,500 downloads, which just blows my mind. But one of the things I like to remind people, I've brought it up in many episodes, is that we don't know it all. Nobody knows it all. If anyone says they know it all, they're lying, and they probably know less than they think they know, especially for me, because, there are people out there who have written lots of books and do have a writing career, and that's something that I am just about to set out on, and I already feel like I've learned so much, and it's good to keep learning and to keep growing. So I just wanted to go through and talk about some of the reasons within the episode and what I learned, and just emphasize to you that yes, I knew these were these were good things to stick by, but I fucked up. Everybody fucks up sometimes. And I just wanted to make sure that I share that with you. One of the first things I struggled with then in my dissertation piece was tension, which is number 3 in the original 9 Surprising Reasons episode. I'm not good at writing tension. I can write tension, and it tends to be something I add in afterwards, but my piece definitely lacked tension. And once I was adding it in, that was the point where I realized how much better those scenes were and the piece was as a whole from having that tension in there. I'm very much a pacifist and a terrible people pleaser. So when it came to writing characters who are angry at each other or don't necessarily think as logically and tend to have big emotional reactions and stuff, it doesn't come easy to me in the slightest, and it's definitely something I need to work on in future pieces. I wrote scenes where there's a man and a wife, for instance, and the wife is quite upset. She's not very happy generally. He is an absolute arsehole to her in the piece. That was fine. I managed to write that. It's weird. It just came naturally to write a character who's an arsehole, apparently. But then her reaction and the ongoing tension between them, I lacked with that scene in particular. In the end, I ended up having her get really angry, have a more emotional outburst at him. She threw a plate across the room. But it's not just those big scenes that you need to focus on. Adding tension and not just having people say exactly the right answer in dialogue, for instance. So if character 1 asks character 2 a question, character 2 doesn't have to answer directly. Character 2 can be hiding something, for instance, and not just give the exact answer that character 1 asks. That builds tension because they're hiding something. They might answer a question with a question. There's all sorts of things you can do to build tension. I just need to make sure I'm doing it more with my characters. Number 4 on the original list was knowing audience expectations. Now, this is a huge one. If you're writing in a particular genre, which 99% of people are, of course, you need to know the genre expectations there. You don't necessarily have to follow every single trope and every single type of thing in that genre. But if an audience is reading a romance book, they're expecting typical things you find in a romance book. For instance, Happily Ever After. If the audience is reading a sci-fi book, they kind of expect some kind of future tech or something like that. Fantasy, they're expecting either some magic or some weird creatures, it doesn't have to mean following every single trope of that genre, but knowing your audience expectations for a particular genre influences your piece in the right way and means it'll fit into that genre, it'll fit into those expectations, and people will want to read it. The piece I wrote for my dissertation was women's fiction. I haven't actually written women's fiction before. I've read some women's fiction, but to be honest, it was never my favorite genre. Nothing wrong with the genre, I just prefer fantasy stuff normally. So in preparation for writing the dissertation piece, I read more in that genre and I tried to sort of do the whole reading as a writer and learning from what's in there. I didn't do it enough, to be honest with you. The reason I chose to write something so different to what I normally write was to push myself out of my comfort zone and to try and learn, and I still learned a lot. I still gained that experience from doing that. But if I had known the audience expectations better, I think the piece would have been better. I would have been able to write something that felt more natural. Whereas in actual fact, I tried to adapt my style to fit the audience as much as I could. And I don't think it quite worked. The genre didn't feel like me. Writing it didn't feel natural. It felt like wearing someone else's skin. That sounds gross, but it felt very unnatural for me to write it. I couldn't be myself. I was forcing my writing style to fit something that didn't fit. So perhaps if I had known the known the audience expectations better and studied the genre more, I would have been able to more easily write something that fit. Even if I hadn't been able to write it more easily, I would have been able to edit it better to fit into that genre, if that makes sense. So know your audience, do your research, read lots of books in that genre if you've never read them before. Don't do what I did. The number 7 in the original post was Overcomplication. And boy, did I try and overcomplicate this for myself. So the piece I wrote was turning a musical, which I love, Blood Brothers, into a novel. And my initial planning was basically to try and take every single scene from the original musical, write it as a prose, and that's my novel. And again, I was trying to push myself into these requirements, and I don't think it was necessary. In actual fact, the scenes and the sections I'd planned that were sort of in the second half or second third? Yes, you know what I mean. The later bit, I ended up removing completely. I planned the first bit and it really focused on the mums. If only if you've watched Blood Brothers, it's about twins. So you see the mums first and then you see the twins growing up. I liked the side of sort of exploring more of the mums experience. And then the scenes I'd planned out where we look at it from the point of view of the twins and we're delving more into their experience and stuff, I actually didn't want to write. It didn't seem that interesting. It felt very flat and forced. And in trying to force it to be exactly like the musical, I'd completely overcomplicated it. And I wasn't trying to tell my own story. I was word for word trying to retell the original story. The more I did this, the more I planned those scenes that I didn't really want to write, the more I dreaded writing it. And that really helped me up. In actual fact, what I ended up doing was telling the whole story from the mum's point of view. And that was much more interesting for me. It was much more real. I could add in a lot more about their experience, which is really glazed over in the musical, I think, and still tell the same kind of story with the same kind of message about class and money and nature versus nurture and stuff, but focus on them. And it felt more genuine. And so if I hadn't tried to overcomplicate it to begin with and just listened to my gut about what I actually wanted to write, I would have gotten there faster. The final point here then is confidence. It's not an easy one to fight against, or lack of confidence is not an easy one to fight against. It's number 9 in the original episode. We did that intentionally because it's the biggest one in a way. I struggle to be confident in, especially in my writing, but in a lot of things, to be honest. And it's hard to shake that. It is hard to believe in yourself sometimes. Well, for me anyway. And it's hard to tell yourself you can do it, especially when I was doing something so different to what I was used to. It's hard to feel like it's worthwhile when you feel like what you're pumping out is shit, basically. But it's not shit. And even if it's shit on the first draft, it can be edited to not be shit. When I was writing and I didn't like what I was writing, I didn't know the genre enough, I'd overcomplicated it, etc., etc. I thought it was terrible, because I was so uncomfortable and it didn't feel like me. It just felt like it was rubbish. Like, it didn't feel good enough. And to be honest with you, the mistakes I made, though I can see them now, I can see how they affected the grade I got. The grade I got was not what I wanted. It was slightly lower than what I wanted. But in actual fact, the grade didn't matter in the end. I pushed myself out of my comfort zone intentionally to learn about resilience, to learn about trying different things, to learn about trying something completely that I've never done before, and working in different styles, etc., etc., etc. So in doing that, I learned so much that even though the grade wasn't what I expected, it doesn't matter. I'm not saying all grades don't matter. School is still important, but with a master's in creative writing, and if you go and listen to the bonus episode that I did about this, one of the things I mentioned was, yes, they are good if you like academia and it pushes you in the right direction. I do work well doing assignments and stuff and having those deadlines and trying different things. But in actual fact, it's not essential. And I got more out of doing that assignment and the masters as a whole than just a grade. So yes, the grade reflected the fact that I didn't do it perfectly, but I didn't need to get out of it what I need to get out of it. I feel stronger now. I feel more resilient having completed that. And look, I get to come here and tell you about all the ways I fucked up to try and encourage you not to. So we're going to, thank you, Christina, for being an amazing editor, play the full original episode now so you can listen to all those points in depth. Just try and remember that, yes, they are great words to live by, and doing all of those 9 things will help you finish your work in progress. It'll help you make your work in progress good, but it is not easy to be perfect. Nobody's perfect. You shouldn't aim for perfect. You should aim for as good as you can be, and you should aim for growth, and you should aim for being the best writer you can be, which is a constant journey. Enjoy. This week, we are discussing the 9 biggest issues that hold you back from finishing your work in progress. And wow, there are some surprising ones in there.
Yeah, what holds people back is often not what they think it is.
I'm very intrigued. Shall we dive in?
Let's go.
First thing that holds a lot of writers back then is lack of research. Why do you say research is one of the biggest reasons people don't finish their work in progress?
If you haven't done your research, do you know your topic enough to be able to write about it? Particularly if you're writing about a theme you're unfamiliar with, for example, sometimes you need to research around it. Like for my current book, I've been researching ancient Egyptian history for one of the characters who comes back 4,000 years later. And if you don't know some of these things, it's really easy to get stuck, and you don't necessarily realize that the reason you can't keep going is because you don't know this thing well enough. And sometimes, say you've hit a plot problem, not necessarily a plot hole, but you're just not sure where to go next in your plot. It's A, because you haven't plotted up front, so you don't know what research you need to do. But B, also because you don't know what is accurate to that situation. So it's like if you're writing a romance and you don't know the structure of a romance, or you don't know how someone who has been in a particular type of relationship in the past would handle a new love interest.
Absolutely. And it goes further than that, I think, as well. If you consider characters, what sort of research would you say is a huge help and potentially the biggest hindrance if not done thoroughly enough?
I think background for your characters is some of the most important research you need to do, but probably the one people neglect the most. Like they might research the time period or the location, but they will forget that there are patterns of behavior that people have, and that's why psychology is a thing. There is a cause and effect to what happens to it. For instance, serial killers often start with mummy issues, torturing animals, and setting fire to things. This isn't always the case.
Lovely.
I know, it's a great image, isn't it? But if you read Mindhunter, which is a great book and completely different to the series, but I'd highly recommend it if you're writing crime or anything with a psychopath in, then you will realize actually that the reason people end up in this place is because of a pattern of behavior and the way they were treated, along with the way they're wired in the first place. And who we are is a combination of nature and nurture. And, you know, someone who's had a perfect childhood but is on the psychopathic scale could come across as normal and supportive, but then actually you look at it and certain traits are still there, but they manifest differently. Like the guy who did a bunch of research into psychopathy discovered he was on the psychopathic scale.
Oh, unfortunate.
Yeah. But because he had had a loving upbringing, he was able to have like healthy relationships and not a serial killer.
Wow, that is so interesting. I think even people who haven't studied psychology at all, like I think most people like me, can vouch for the fact that your childhood has an impact on how you live your life. You know, even in the most basic terms, people crave stuff in their adulthood that they didn't have in their childhood and things like that. So there's a lot to be said for that kind of research, I think.
Yeah. The thing is, childhood is a big one because everything is new and novel to us when we're a kid.
Yeah.
And whenever something is new to us, it's more likely to affect us going forwards than something we've done on autopilot a gazillion times. Like if you've driven from A to B 100 times, it's not going to affect you. But then if you're doing A to B and you get into a car accident, how you feel about that drive going forwards will change because that's a new experience for you. Like I remember when I was younger, we were going up this hill into a car park and my mum stalled the car and the car started rolling backwards. And there were people at the bottom of the hill. And like I don't know, maybe I was like a teenager at the oldest. I was wrecking it at this point. And ever since then, I have been terrified of driving on hills. I used to really panic during hill starts in my driving lessons. So my driving instructor would make me do them more.
But that's both cruel and kind, isn't it?
I know. I should mention the people were fine, but the car didn't roll back more than a foot. But I was terrified. I didn't know how cars worked at that age, you know?
Of course, yeah.
I didn't care because I couldn't drive. But ever since then, when I'm going up a steep hill, it terrifies me. Like driving to yours, there are a couple of steep hills and it terrifies me.
Oh, bless you. I didn't know that. Sorry, I'll move.
Yes, please do.
I'll work on that just for you.
Thank you.
That makes perfect sense, though. I mean, these things have a lasting effect.
Mm-hmm.
The next topic we have listed here is plotting. Why would you say plot is a big reason people get stuck?
Well, if you don't know where you're going, it's really hard to maintain momentum. Going back to cars, I have a weird thing for cars and baking analogies. Would you get into a car if you don't know where you're going? You know, even if you're using a sat nav or you've checked the route online and printed it off or whatever, you know what your end point is. And if you know where you want your characters to be at the end, whether that's they've caught the murderer or they're with their love interest or everyone's dead, you know what you're working towards. Yeah. And that makes it considerably easier to keep going because you've got something to work towards. And it may be that you don't know what you're going to see along the way, or you might know certain points like where your service stations are, for example, but you don't have to plot it to the nth degree. You need to just have a general direction.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know if this is relevant, but the only characters I can think of in stories who set off with no direction are the ones that are not going through a good time.
But then it tends to be external triggers that impact them. Like in The Rose Garden Mysteries by Denise Grover Swank, it is external triggers that trigger her internal journey. And she has a balance of both throughout the series. And that's what makes it so powerful. And you really see how Rose goes from being a recluse that was treated utterly terribly by her mother and then goes on to become, I'm trying to avoid spoilers, but she's like a completely different person working with people you would not expect someone who is afraid of her own shadow to be even thinking about, let alone conversing with and working with.
And that's the important thing, isn't it? Your character has to go on a journey, whether that's physical or mental. You've got to know where they're going to end up, even if you don't know how to get there. what they're actually going to go through specifically, there has to be a change there, doesn't there?
Precisely.
Number 3 we have on our list is tension. Now, all good books need tension. I think some of the ones out there that don't are the ones that tend to be not read or not finished, at least. I know I've certainly put down a few in the last few months.
Yeah, if things are too easy for your character, people will get very, very bored very, very quickly because the character has nothing to lose. So the reader has no reason to keep going. The more someone has to lose, the more powerful their arc is going to be. And that's why fears and flaws are really, really important when you're writing, because they're what holds your character back and also what humanizes them and makes them relatable.
Absolutely. So why would you say tension, or increasing the stakes, as some people call it, is important in every genre?
Because if you start really, really high, you have nowhere to go, and then your story goes like this, and it becomes like one of those really high concept TV shows that are like, this premise is great, let's go, let's do it. And then by the end of season 1, people are like, what is this shit? Why was everyone so hyped about it? I don't want to name names.
No,
people who are familiar with me will know what TV shows I'm referring to. Just look at the 2000s. There are a few examples from there. And I think a lot of producers now have learned from that mistake, and they know that if you've got a high concept premise, you need to have enough of a story beyond that premise to keep going. And that's really hard if you start with just the most ridiculously high premise and you don't know your endpoint. And the two work really well, because if you know your endpoint, then you can kind of work backwards. Oh, attacking my mic. You can work. This is what I need to attach the shock mount. Then you can work backwards and go, okay, this is another really high tension scene, but this one's a little bit lower, and you can move things around and piece them together like a jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah, absolutely. And map it. I find mapping it and seeing it physically, you can pinpoint where it goes up and where it goes down and try and have a nice balance.
Yeah, I used to do it on my coffee table using post-it notes, and I would map out the peaks and troughs in the story. But now, because I've done it so much, I can kind of visualize it in my head, so I can bullet point it in Scrivener. And it's just a case of I've done it so much, it's a lot easier for me to visualize, but I have to have those bullet points there, because then I have got the idea out of my head, and then there is room for other stuff in there.
I think another issue in terms of stakes is not increasing them enough. You get some stories that start really low and never quite get high enough to raise that tension, do you think?
Yeah, totally. It is a hard balance, because I think people can worry about not having enough tension. They can worry about having too much, and then they overthink it or overcomplicate it, and it becomes really challenging, and that can really stop them. But I think that's why having fears and flaws is so important, because people will only overcome those things when they are pushed to the extreme. And it has to be, sometimes even as a writer, sometimes it can push you to uncomfortable levels. Even like some of the things I have put my characters through, it was very challenging to write, either because it was close to home or it was just really mean.
There's that saying, isn't there? Life begins outside your comfort zone.
That's
maybe
true.
Like stories begin outside their character's comfort zone. Maybe that's
they 100% do.
Work out.
Yeah, they really, really do. That's really true.
Do you reckon we could trademark that?
I think some smart person's probably already said it.
Our next issue then is a little bit more complex. Broken down, it's not knowing your audience expectations for your genre, and also therefore not knowing your genre enough. Why is it important to be aware of audience expectations before you start? Are genres even that important?
So I know that when either you write for fun or you write for yourself, there can be a really strong sense of not wanting to be written into a box. You know, I'm doing this for me. My idea is a hybrid of this and that and that and this and all of that. But the blunt fact is, if you don't have a genre, you don't have an audience.
You need an audience to sell to.
Exactly. Because like it or not, people get attached to genres first, then the series, then the author. So it's a really long-term relationship that you are looking to build. And also when you are writing anything that's new to you, you have to know the rules before you can break them. So going back to my cake analogies, because I do love a good cake analogy. If you are baking a cake for the very first time, you'd probably stick to something really simple, like a tray bake or maybe a Victoria sponge, right?
Yep, that's true.
But now I really want a Victoria sponge cake. And then As you become more experienced, you will start to experiment with flavors and shapes and decorating and all these different things you can do that makes your cake more unique.
Yeah.
But if you don't know the basics of what makes a good cake, then you can't break those rules, because the basics of what makes a good cake don't change. You need to cream your sugar and butter, and you need to get it to a certain consistency before you do anything else. And you need a certain type of flour for this type of cake and a certain type of flour for that type of cake. And that matters,
That makes sense.
Yeah, it's no different than poetry in that regard, because a lot of people panic about writing poetry. It's like, actually, there are rules to poetry. And if you study those first, then writing poetry becomes a lot easier and a lot more fun. And then you can just do whatever you want with it.
That makes perfect sense. I recently started adding walnuts to my banana bread. Just saying. But yes, I think with regards to these rules, or at least these typical things you would expect to see, they vary very much across all genres. But if you read in your genre, I think it's very easy, or at least it's the best way I've found, to pick up those rules. You know, you can get a rough feel for when certain things are revealed in a fantasy story, for instance, or you can pick up different ways characters are developed, or like we were discussing the other day, how a slow burn romance is sort of put across. And the easiest way to do that is just by reading, I think. I mean, reading outside your genre is also very helpful. I would always say people should read outside their genre, but you've got to make sure you know the genre you want to write in. You've got to learn those rules first.
Yeah, totally. And it's not just about reading it passively. You need to read it actively and analyze it. You're not going to learn these things by osmosis, not without a good 20, 30 years under your belt. So you want to be cracking out the pencil and writing in the margins or highlighting on your e-reader. It pains me to
I'm so glad you said pencil, because I can't write in books with a pen.
No. But you need to be making those notes. I know one of our friends uses post-it notes on the page. That's another option.
It's just messy.
Yeah, but at least then it's not defacing the book and you've still got the notes on that relevant page. And I think you do need to be actively going, okay, she's done this at this point, or he's done that here, and thinking about why they have done it. Like one of the big rules in crime is to always introduce your opponent in crime within the first third of the story.
Okay.
I read a book recently that didn't introduce the kind of main opponent who was behind all the big bad stuff at the start. And he was actually only in a couple of scenes throughout the entire 3-book series. Was it 3 or 5? Can't remember. It's 3 or 5. And I felt really cheated. Because I never could have figured out who it was. And half the joy of reading something like that is to figure out who did it. And you can't do that if their part is like this.
There you go. So this person either knew the rule or didn't know the rule, or like I said, knew it and tried to break it, and it obviously failed.
Yeah, exactly. And then you get people like Agatha Christie who write stories and they make your head explode sometimes, and you've got no chance of figuring it out, but she clearly knows the genre and can subvert it really well.
That's why she's still so famous. I mean,
well, yeah, exactly. She's the queen of crime writing for a reason.
Exactly. There you go. The next topic on our little list here is overthinking. So overthinking is when you spend more time worrying about the words appearing on the page than spending time actually just getting them on the page. And I think overthinking is to do with people and their confidence levels. Overthinking can come from depression and anxiety sometimes, I think. I won't name names, of course, but I know that I know a lot of writers who have issues with those kind of things. How would you say overthinking impacts writers?
I think the trouble is, like you say, overthinking tends to come from a place of depression or anxiety a lot of the time. And a lot of writers do have mental health issues. There is nothing wrong with that. And writing is very much an outlet for those issues. But if you're so afraid of that thing you want to do that it holds you back, that's when you end up in this category. Because at the end of the day, if you want to write, if you want to publish, you've just got to do it. No one's going to give you permission to do it. No one's going to say that your first draft is like the next great British novel or whatever your country is. You know, it's a first draft at the end of the day. You don't need to worry about it being perfect or thinking about what other people think at that point. Yes, you need to know your genre, but that's not the same as worrying about what other people think, because the first draft is about telling yourself the story, and you can make it sexy in editing. Just focus on getting the story out of your head, because it is taking up so much space that it makes it really hard for you to do anything else. And getting that first draft done is such a relief.
Just such a relief. Get it down.
get it finished, get to the last word, even though you might have written that first, and
yeah,
edit
I
it.
write the ending last quite a lot, actually.
I actually wrote the ending, as you know, to my current work in progress the other day. So it ended up being
How much
really
have you
long.
written of the rest?
Very little. I've written like 2 or 3 other scenes. But that was the bit that was stuck in my head, you know.
Exactly.
And even though I sat there and I thought, well, this is not exactly what I want it to be, and there are parts of this that need changing, but now that it's there, A, we have that thing to work towards, like you said earlier, and B, I can worry about editing later.
Yeah,
Just
exactly.
getting it out frees me up.
It does. It very much does. And the reason that I often write the ending first is because I don't write in chronological order. I find that writing the kind of key moments of tension or the scenes I'm most emotionally invested in, which usually are the same thing, means that then because I'm so emotionally invested in it by that point, I then want to piece it all together to form a coherent story to show other people.
That makes perfect
because
sense.
I like it so much. And actually, I have written 1 book in chronological order out of 15.
15.
And technically, it's a novella as well.
Yeah. Wow, that goes to show, doesn't it? I mean, I know different things work for different people, but if you've got a particular scene stuck in your head, but you're supposed to be writing a scene 2 or scene 3, just write the scene that's stuck in your head, you know?
Yeah.
Give yourself a break.
Yeah. Write what you want to write so long as it's within the kind of direction that you're heading in, because it's all progress in the same direction.
True. I mean, I wouldn't say write the end of book 3 when you're still on book 1.
I think some people do write the ending of their series really far in advance because it's the same reason as writing the ending of the book, is that you know exactly where you're going to. You know who you've killed off. You know who's married who. And so you're like, okay, I've got to get them to this point, but how do I get them there? And that's kind of where the fun plotting side of things comes in, is the question of how you do it.
And how do we torture them the best?
Yes, exactly. You looked very evil when you said that.
Sorry, it just comes out in me. You bring it out in me. So we keep mentioning editing. It is a very, very important facet of writing. Why is editing as you write such a bad thing?
So if you edit as you write, it does 2 things. First of all, actually, it's 3 things. It slows you down because it's multitasking, which means that your brain actually can't do either thing to the same quality level because its focus is split, and our brains even are designed to focus on one thing at a time. Like if you're riding a bike and listening to a podcast, that's fair because they use different parts of your brain. But reading and writing,
this podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Like reading and writing both require words and language usage, even though one is analytical and one is creative. And so if you're trying to do them both at the same time, it becomes really challenging to get any words down on the page because you're like, is this the right word? Is that the right word? And if you're writing a poem, that's not such a bad thing. But if you're writing something much longer, you can worry about adding in those words to make it sound really cool and create the more evocative images when you're editing. But you want to get the idea out of your head as quickly as possible, because if you're editing as you write, as I said, it slows you down, but it also damages your confidence. Because you're second guessing everything you've said and done. And you will improve as a writer and an editor quicker if you do them completely separately. Like,
oh, you mean like take a day to write, take a day to edit and alternate?
No, I mean longer. Like at the moment I've taken 2 or 3 months out and I am purely writing things. I have not edited a thing since I don't know when, probably November. No, I edited some stuff this month, but it was client work, so that doesn't count. All of my book stuff, I'm just throwing ideas at the moment, and I've got 3 novellas, drafted in, I want to say a month, probably a little bit longer because some of them were half format ideas.
Wow.
But I literally just was throwing things onto the page. And during some writing sessions, I was doing like 3,000-4,000 words an hour because I was just putting my headphones in with a playlist related to my characters on my story. And then just go, okay, this is the scene I'm going to write. And then I just kept going and I'd write the next scene in the next scene. And I'm like, I know I've got to rewrite some of these things, but I'll fix it later. Because I know if I am in 100% editing mode, I will be able to edit to a higher quality. So the other thing is, if you don't want to take like big chunks, I would always say, once you've got that first draft down, put your book away for at least a month. Do not look at it. Do not think about it. Maybe go on to book 2, but ideally go on to something completely different, a different series, a different medium, even a different craft if you want to, something to completely emotionally detach you from it, so that then when you do edit, you're completely objective.
And the thing is, I've found is that the thing that sort of liberated me to some extent was just saying to myself, this first draft can be as terrible as it needs to be. Like, it doesn't matter. No one is going to see it. I think there's a quote from Stephen King, and I'm going to misquote him here, obviously, because I'm just that professional. But basically, the first draft is telling yourself the story, and then you edit it to get the second, third, whatever draft to work out how best to portray the story to other people. And that's something I really like to try and stick to, because it's never going to come out perfectly. And in fact, I saw the other day on the Writer's Cookbook website, we have a blog post, which I think is a little bit older now, but it's still very relevant. It's called The Cake Analogy, why you should never show your first draft to anyone, because it's raw. It's the analogy that it makes on the blog is that it's like baking a cake. You've got all these raw ingredients, and when you start putting stuff together, it doesn't look like a cake, it doesn't taste like a cake, so stop showing it to people because it's not a cake yet.
Yeah, exactly. Like, once you put all your ingredients together, you wouldn't then show it to someone and go, hey, what do you think to this? What do you think to how it looks? What do you think to how it tastes? I mean, you might taste it, but the cooking can still change the flavor of it, right?
Well, exactly. And there's no way you can properly predict how that cake is going to taste or look like looking at those ingredients.
Exactly. And unless you are dealing with a professional chef, they're not going to be able to tell you what the raw ingredients are going to look like when they're cooked. Someone like Paul Hollywood can look at approved loaf of bread and go, that's overapproved, it's going to be crap. But your average person can't do that.
No.
And so you're better off waiting until you're done, because you will get better feedback from people if you're showing them something that you have put your best effort into and you can't think of anything else to do.
Absolutely.
At the end of the day, like, good things take time, like baking, particularly bread making, which I have a vendetta against, or writing a book. And yes, you can rapid release. And yes, there are people who can write really, really quickly, but those people have been doing it for a hell of a long time.
Yeah, you're right. I think at the end of the day, you don't want to complicate it for yourself. But overcomplication of a multitude of things can affect a lot of writers, I think. You can overcomplicate your idea, and I think that can become a huge roadblock in your path to getting it finished. How would you say overcomplicating things stops writers finishing their work in progress?
Yeah, I think it can sometimes be a case of, oh, I don't know this idea well enough, so I've got to stop. Or they come up with a very convoluted, overcomplicated plot that they, for want of a better way of putting it, are not experienced enough to write. And this is why I say do not write epic fantasy as your first book, because you'll probably never finish it, because it is more work. And the more work that is involved in that first book, the harder you will find it to maintain that momentum to keep going, because you have to think about the magic system, not just what people can do with their powers, but what are the consequences of those powers and what are the limitations of those powers. Or you're trying to write a really complicated storyline and it doesn't work. Simple storylines are effective. Look at the remake of Mad Max. That was very, very highly regarded because it didn't try and go, oh, we're a really deep and meaningful action film. It's like, we're an action film, we're going to blow shit up. And it works. And it's a beautiful film. It's a really good film because it didn't try to be something that it wasn't, and it didn't overcomplicate anything.
Sometimes that's the best way to be. People don't always want the most in-depth plots. And I think what you'll find actually is that most people just quite often just want a good story to read. It doesn't have to be the most advanced, the most intelligent, the most complicated thing ever. It just has to be a good story and it has to work in the most
most people, they read before bed, before they go to sleep. So if your story is really complicated, it's probably gonna help them fall asleep for the wrong reasons.
Which is not what you want. That's not what you want.
Because that's not going to get you. Yeah, that's not going to get you the positive reviews and a lot of readers.
No. One of the issues I hear people talk about the most is having time to write. What is your answer to this?
My answer is really harsh. And it's that I wrote, edited, and published my first book in a year while working full-time and moving house and still having a social life. So it is a case of prioritizing your writing, because if you don't, no one else will do it for you. You have to really actively make that time and look at those little pockets of time. Like, are you spending too long aimlessly scrolling through Facebook? Are you doom scrolling at night on your phone instead of sleeping, or jotting down ideas, or even expressive writing about what's keeping you awake? Are you watching loads of videos on YouTube of like baby goats prancing around? Ellie.
No.
And is that either helping you relax for half an hour, or is it distracting you from being productive for half an hour? Because it's all very well and good taking a little bit of time to relax. You know, I take a break playing Planet Coaster, for example, but you need to find a balance between taking that time for yourself for those things that help you disconnect and working towards your life goals. Because if you're not working towards your goals, then they're never going to happen.
When I first read what you'd put about that in your book, Productivity for Writers, which I do have here for anyone watching the video, I'd highly recommend this book.
Thank you.
There's a whole section in there, though, and about making time rather than finding time. Like, if you're trying to find time and waiting for the productivity fairy to turn up and grant you some magic time in the day, it's not going to work. But if you actively make time for it, even if it's just 10 minutes a day, you can do that. I would challenge anyone out there to tweet us their schedule and we'll find at least 10 minutes in it.
I actually think taking 10 minutes a day is more productive than having an hour. And it's because it's easier to concentrate for those 10 minutes, particularly if you're not used to writing for long periods of time. Like a lot of online communities these days have productivity sessions and they're never longer than 45 minutes. Because by that point, it is a lot harder to focus, and most people can get what they want to do done in 45 minutes if they've broken it down small enough. Like when we have our writing sessions, for example, I will usually write a scene or two in 35 or 45 minutes, depending on which we go with. And by the end of that, I am kind of starting to lag a lot of the time. It's like, okay, I need a tea break now kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I like doing that shorter session because, like I say, before the session even starts, we talk about what we're going to write that session. And then you're there. It's that accountability as well, but it's also saying for the next 35 minutes, this is what we're doing and we are finishing it. And just getting through it. Yeah,
and sometimes it doesn't even need to be an accountability session. Sometimes it can be you're stuck in a really long queue, so you're going to jot ideas down on your phone.
Yeah, do that. I've definitely done that in the past.
Yeah, I used to write a lot of blog posts when I was on the tram going to and from work. A lot of them were drafted on that tram on a note on my phone. A lot of them.
Would carry around an actual pen and paper notebook because I find that easier to just jot random stuff down in.
That would end badly on a tram, I think.
But I would do it on the bus. But then sometimes the bus would stop and I'd be walking off the bus trying to finish writing what I'm saying. Yeah. I was known once or twice to stop in the middle of co-op and lean up against the shelf and just finish writing what I'm saying. But that's just me. I'm the local weirdo. So
at least you accept it.
I find it. You've got to embrace it, haven't you?
True.
But yeah, I mean, you've got to have confidence in yourself as well, I think.
Yeah, and sometimes, you know, if you lack that confidence, you can feel like you don't deserve time to write because it's something that you enjoy. So you actively push this thing that you love away, almost as a way of punishing yourself. But it just makes you feel worse, you know.
Absolutely. Confidence is a huge issue that affects
a
lot of really good writers that don't get a chance to be that writer.
I tend to find the more confident someone is in their abilities, the worse they actually are at it. And the less confident someone is, the better they are, but they can't admit it. But they are also more open to the feedback and in improving.
Yeah.
But they have to get over first that kind of, oh, I'll never be good enough mentality. And that's a really, really hard thing to shake. What people don't always consider is that if you're unconfident as a person, it will affect your confidence as a writer as well. It's not just about your confidence in your writing skills. It's about your confidence in who you are. Because if you doubt that, then you're never going to put yourself out there enough to be criticized.
Yeah.
And you will get criticized.
That's part and parcel of writing, isn't it? Which I think is, people underestimate how useful and how much you can learn from being criticized. Constructive criticism, I'm not saying go out on the street and get everyone to tell you you're crap, but I mean, constructive criticism is invaluable.
Exactly. And you have to be strong enough to be able to take it. And that only comes from really doing some work to look into why you're not as confident as you could be. Because you need to get to a point where you really believe that you are worth putting that time and effort into your goals.
Which is difficult. I mean, I'm personally a very logic-based kind of person. So I have to prove things to myself before I really believe them. But everybody's different, aren't they?
Yeah. How do you work around that logic in terms of building your confidence then?
There's two main ways. Either seeing someone who I can see similarities with myself in and seeing that they've done it, and saying, well, if they can do it, I can do it. As it's easier than said than done, but I think it's definitely a good technique. But I think also just pushing myself to prove it to myself. Yeah, I may not believe that it's going to go very well, but how will I know until I try? Do you see what I mean? And having supportive friends around to push me in that direction is very helpful as well. The confidence is not easy to gain. I don't know about you, but I struggle with it.
Oh, totally. It's really funny, actually. I have a lot of conversations like this about people, and I tell them that I don't have any confidence and I'm like really anxious all the time. And they're like, no, you're not. You come across really like bubbly and talkative. I'm like, no, if people talk to me, or I will talk back, but I'm secretly terrified of everything. And I've just learned to deal with it. You know, I read a book a few years ago called The Confidence Code, and I forget the authors. It's Catty Kay and I think Claire Shipman. And at least one of them's a BBC journalist. And one of the things they said that really surprised me and I'd never thought of before is that anxiety is the opposite of confidence.
Right.
Because anxiety is fear and it holds you back and you're too scared to do stuff. But confidence, when you're confident in your abilities, you will go ahead and you will do things. And, you know, it's a sliding scale. Sometimes you'll be too scared to leave the house. Sometimes you'll be running a marathon. You know, that can vary on a day-to-day basis, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with your confidence levels changing depending on if you've had a setback, or if you've got chronic pain and you're having a bad pain day, or if you've woken up with a headache, or you haven't slept well, or you've just lost a loved one, or your depression is flaring up and you don't know why. If you need to take that time to rest, to recalibrate before you do something and put yourself out there and make yourself vulnerable, then that's totally okay.
Absolutely. You've got to work with yourself at the end of the day. I know that sounds cheesy, but
Yeah.
you know, you've got to make allowances for yourself in some regards.
Yeah, the more you do it, the more then you are able to do those things that require confidence when you don't feel particularly confident.
Well, that sounds like a really fantastic book recommendation. Thank you. And that was all of our 9 reasons as well.
I'm going to go make a cuppa now. I'm finished with my cookies that I made.
Definitely coffee time.
I can't get the lid off our coffee jar, so I'm not going to drink it for a while.
Oh, bless you.
Yeah, time to crack out the PG tips and finish off our cookies. All right. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time. Bye.